A few months ago, BotSpot released some software called BVM, which is a way to run Windows 11 as a virtual machine on top of a Raspberry Pi 5. And this worked really well. However, there was a bit of a downside. It was quite a cut down version of Windows 11. There's quite a bit that was cut out in order to maximize performance and to make it really easy to set up. But it did get me thinking, what if you want to run a full version of Windows 11 as a virtual machine on a Raspberry Pi 5? You can do it, but it is kind of fiddly. Let's go and take a look right here on Jeff's Pie in the Sky. Hello once again, Pi geeks and techno nerds all around the world. My name's Jeff, and I'm an IT professional who's been in the industry for over 30 years. I've been using Raspberry Pi since they first came out, and I wanted to share with you some of the projects that I've done along the way. If you like what you see on this channel, please hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you want to see more, and hit that notification bell so you can be told when I put a new video out. Let me know in the comments how you get on with this project, and if you've got any ideas for other projects that you'd like to see me do in the future, put those in there as well. All of the comments and the interactions really help with the channel. I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and so the more that you can share this video, comment on it, give it that thumbs up, the more likely it is that I'll hit that target. And thank you all so much for the help and support that you've given me right up to this point. Now, the BVM project that I mentioned before is really cool. It gives you this kind of menu-based interface where you just click through section by section, and eventually you end up with a running Windows 11 virtual machine. Now, under the hood, as it says in the title there, it's using the QEMU KVM hypervisor in order to run the virtual machine. Now, this is a really great hypervisor, and I love using it. I made a video before about running Ubuntu and Alpine Linux virtual machines, and you can see that here. Now, within that, I was using a tool called virt-manager, and this basically makes use of an API called libvirt that sits on top of the QEMU KVM hypervisor, and it just provides a really nice GUI for managing all of your virtual machines. So what I wanted to do here was set up a Windows 11 virtual machine using virt-manager rather than the BVM stack. Now, by doing this, I could also install a full version of Windows 11 and not have to live with the fact that BotSpot cut out an awful lot of the software in order to improve performance. All of that is a good thing, don't get me wrong. And the BotSpot software is fantastic, and it is definitely the easiest way to get a Windows 11 virtual machine running on your box. But if you do want a full version of Windows 11 running within a virtual machine, and you want it to be easily manageable within virt-manager, then stay tuned to this video. Now, what you can see running here is a Raspberry Pi 5, and rather than running a micro SD card to host the operating system, I've connected an NVMe drive in a USB 3 enclosure. Now, this gives me a lot more storage space than your average SD card, and it's also way quicker. So when we're going through installing Windows 11, things will be a lot more speedy. It's not to say you can't use an SD card with this, but you'd want one that's really quite big. Windows wants something like 30 to 40 gigabytes to really run comfortably. And so if you consider the Raspberry Pi OS operating system as well, you'd probably want an SD card that's something around 64 gigs. Given the fact that you could pick up a PCI Express 3 NVMe drive for relatively little money now, along with a USB 3 caddy. For me personally, I really like having the speed boost from it. In this case, I'm running with a 512 gigabyte NVMe drive. Now, if we're going to install Windows, the first thing that you're going to need is the Windows 11 ISO itself. And this is really easy to get. If you just do a Google search for Windows 11 ARM64 download, you'll end up at this page here. But for your convenience, every page that you see on this video, I'll include in the description below. All you have to do is use the drop down to select which version of Windows that you want. In this case, there is only one. You then click the Download Now button. Once your request is validated, you then just need to provide the product language. In my case, I'm going to pick English International since I'm in the UK, and then just click Confirm. After this, you can just click the Download Now button and your download will start. I've already got this downloaded, so I'm not going to download it again. Now, the other thing that you're going to need is a set of virt-IO drivers for Windows. This is so that within your virtual machine, all of the devices that the QEMU KVM hypervisor present to the virtual machine can be driven by the Windows operating system. Now, you'll see we'll have some fun and games with this in a little while, but I found the easiest way to get hold of these drivers is to go to this Proxmox page. And then if you scroll down a little bit, there's this section about downloading the wizard, and there's a link provided to the most recent ISO image. And again, just click that and it will start downloading. And once again, I'll provide the link to this page within the description. Now everything's downloaded, there is some stuff that we need to do before we can actually install Windows. However, I want to show you some of the problems along the way first. Now, initially setting up the virtual machine is easy. If you just come down to System Tools in the main menu and click on Virtual Machine Manager, this will start up the virt-manager software, and you just unlock that with your Pi password. You can then click on this first icon here to create a new virtual machine. Say that you want to use local install media, and the architecture options are fine just as they are. After you click forward, then you need to select your ISO image. So in this case, I'm going to come down to Browse Local, navigate to the Downloads directory, and select our Windows 11 ISO. I'm then going to click Open. Now in the section in the bottom, it's meant to automatically pick up what the intended operating system is, but for some reason in this case it can't. So I have to uncheck the automatically detect button, and then if I type in Win11, it comes up with some options, and I can select this Microsoft Windows 11 option at the top, and then click forward. It complains that the permissions aren't exactly perfect, so just click on the Yes button and it will fix that. You can then configure how much memory and CPU resource you want to make available to the virtual machine. In this case, I want to allocate 4 GB of RAM and 3 CPU cores. My Pi 5 has 8 GB of RAM, so it's about half the available memory, and then just click forward. You then need to create the virtual hard drive. By default, it will create one that's 20 GB. I want one that's a bit bigger. I'm going to make it 40 GB. And once that figure's adjusted, again, just click forward. Now we're almost ready to go, but do check this Customize Configuration Before Install button before you click Finish. Now it'll also say here that the virtual network is not active, and do you want to start the network now? And to this you definitely want to say yes. So here is the structure of our initial virtual machine, but there are a couple of other changes that we need to make. And before we can make them, there's a change that we need to make on the virtual machine manager itself. Click in the Edit menu and then select Preferences, and enable the checkbox that says Enable XML Editing. This is really important for the next bit to work. Now go back to your virtual machine definition and hit the XML tab, and you want to come down to this Hyper-V section. And for everything within there, you need to set its state to off. Once you've made those changes, just hit Apply. We then need to add a virtual keyboard and mouse into our virtual machine. So for this, we need to click Add Hardware, go to Input, and by default, a graphics tablet will be selected. And this is actually what we want. It works a whole lot better than the default mouse that you can add. So just hit Finish. Now click Add Hardware again, go back to Input, and in the drop-down select USB keyboard, and again click Finish. Now go back to Add Hardware, go to Video, and use the drop-down to go to RAM FB. Select that and then hit Finish. And one final time go back to Add Hardware, click on Graphics, and come straight down to the Finish button. That's all the changes that we need to make here. So you can go ahead and just click the Begin Installation button. This will start the boot up procedure and it will boot from the CD-ROM. Hit a key to enter the installer, and after a little while you'll end up at this screen here. And this is our first big problem. The Windows installer itself needs some drivers in order for the installer to work against your hypervisor. Now if I click on the Browse button here, you can see that only one disk is exposed, this boot disk. And if I open that, you can see there's a small selection of folders on it. But there's nothing on here that would support the VirtIO drivers that we need to provide to the installer. Now you would think that this would be easy to solve. In theory, you should just be able to go to the virtual machine settings, click on Add Hardware, and under Storage, if you click on Select or Create Custom Storage, and then Manage, Browse Local, navigate to our Downloads directory, and select the VirtIO ISO, then Open, we should now be able to present this as a virtual disk to our installer. We could change the device type to CD-ROM, and we'll leave it as a SCSI CD-ROM since that worked for our Windows installer, so you can just click Finish. Now if we switch back to the console of our virtual machine, what we should be able to do here is cancel out of that window, hit Browse again, and we should see our new CD. However, it doesn't show up. Now I don't know if this is a Windows issue or if it's a QEMU hypervisor issue, but I've tried every single different type of storage option and none allow me to expose that driver CD to the Windows installer. Instead, what I've had to do is actually make some changes to the Windows install CD itself. So let's go ahead and make those changes. But before I do, I'm going to cancel out of this window and then use this drop down to change the virtual machine state and say Force Off. This will just shut the machine down without allowing it to go any further. Now for this next part, I've switched to a terminal window, just because it's going to be easier for you to be able to see the commands that I run, as some of them do get a little bit complicated. Now you can see here I'm in my downloads directory, and in here we can find our two ISO files. First thing I'm going to do is create a directory to hold all of our Windows ISO install media. I'm then going to mount the ISO into that, and I can do that with this command here. Mounting has to be run with sudo as it needs root privilege. I can then just use the mount command, giving it the name of our ISO file and the name of the directory within which we want to install it. And that's mounted just fine. If we look within here, there aren't an awful lot of files and directories around. And what's really interesting is that this doesn't match what we were seeing when we were going through the installer earlier. And I'll explain why in a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is create a directory to hold my VirtIO drivers, and then I'm going to mount the VirtIO ISO into that. And if we look in that directory, we can now see all of those files. Now, when it comes to mounting these virtual CDs, they mount read-only, meaning that we can't change anything within these directories. Or at least, if we do, nothing meaningful will happen. And so what we want to do is create ourselves an area where we can create our own Windows 11 install set. So what I've done here is create a new directory called Win11-install2, and I'm using the rsync command to copy every file from the Windows 11 install set into that new directory. Now that's finished, we want to pull out just the ARM64 specific versions of those drivers. So I've created myself a directory called drivers, and then I'm using the find tool to look within the directory that we've mounted our VirtIO disk into, looking specifically for directories where within the name the path W11/ARM64 exists, and then I'm going to use the -exec option to call into rsync, which is going to take every directory that it finds, and it's going to put its contents into our drivers directory. Now after the -exec, I also need to provide an escaped semicolon. Now that's finished, if I look within the drivers ARM64 directory, you can see all of the different drivers are now there. So how do we go about adding this to the install media? Well, remember back how when we ran our Windows 11 installer and the directory contents that we ended up seeing didn't look like what's on the CD here. For example, there were directories for program files and program files x86. And you can see that they are not part of this install CD. Now within the Windows installer, there are these two files here with a .wim extension, and these are Windows image files. Now we can take a look at these in more detail by installing the Wim tools package onto our Raspberry Pi. And now I'm going to use this Wim info tool to take a look at the boot.wim Windows image file. Now within here there are actually two images, and through a lot of trial and error I've actually found that it's this second one that ultimately gets exposed when you get to that part of the Windows install process. Now I found this out by using the win-mount command to mount the Windows image onto my Raspberry Pi, and then took a look at the file system, and this was the one that matched what I was ultimately able to see. Now there is actually a way that we can update that boot.wim image, but first of all we need to create a text file that will include the command that we need to run. So within this command we're saying that we want to add everything that's in our drivers/arm64 directory and have that exposed as /sources/drivers. Now if I just save out that file, I can then run this command here to update that image. Again, it has to be run with root privilege. The command I want to run is vim update. I then give it the path to the Windows image that we want to update. I then say it's the second image within that image file that we're targeting. And then I redirect our command.txt file into it. And this goes ahead and makes that change. Now we're nearly ready to create our very own Windows 11 install media. But there is one other thing that we need to do first. I need to install this package called dumpet. And now that's installed, I'm going to run it, specifying -i and the name of our ISO file. And the really important data that we need is what's against this load LBA option at the bottom, where it says 550. This is the offset within the ISO where the boot EFI image lives. Now we need this as a separate file in order to be able to reconstruct an ISO image from our modified Windows 11 installer. And so now I'm going to use this command. DD is kind of like a file copy operation, but it works on raw data. I use the IF option to specify that our Windows 11 ISO image is our input file. I use this BS option to say that the block size is 2048, and this represents the block size of data within CD images. I need to skip 550 bytes into the file. I then want to grab the next 720 bytes, and I'm going to write that out using the OF option or output file option as win_efi_boot.img. And then I'm going to use sudo privilege to copy that EFI image into our Windows 11 installed media under the EFI directory. Now we need to install a tool called MK ISO FS in order to allow us to create our new Windows 11 ISO. So to allow that, I've made a slight mistake in this command. You need to go ahead and run sudo apt install, but rather than MK ISO FS, use this package instead, gen ISO image. As you can see here, apt is actually pretty clever, and it knows that the command is provided by that package, and so it's corrected it for me. Now we're going to use this huge command here to make our new Windows 11 ISO. We have to run it with root privilege, and the command we need to run here is mk ISO fs, or make ISO file system. These first options here are all about creating the legacy boot options. Now this is as if you had a BIOS installed on your system as opposed to it using UEFI. All of this pre-exists, and so we can just use these commands as is. However, this next section specifies where it takes the UEFI bootloader from, and by default this doesn't get extracted from the ISO and made visible within our directory, and that's why we had to go through extracting it specifically and creating our own file. And we specify the location of that on the install media with this -b option here. We then tell it which format of ISO file we're using, and that we're using the UDF file system. And the -allow limited size means that we can create files that otherwise would be too big for an ISO file. We give it the output name with the -o option, in this case Win11.ISO, and where all of the install media is, in this case Win11-install2. Now this does take a fair amount of time to build the ISO, so I'll come back when it's done. And now that's complete, we can go and see if we can get that working with our virtual machine manager. So back in the virtual machine manager here, if I just go back to the virtual machine settings and I come down to SCSI CD-ROM 1, I can now click the Browse button, come down to Browse Local, and from our Downloads directory, select Win11.ISO and hit Open, and then hit Apply. And now if I start up our virtual machine again, we get back to this page where it's asking for the drivers. But this time, if I hit Browse, and I open up this boot.x drive, go to Sources, and then I hit this drivers directory, and OK, you can see we now get a bunch of drivers show up. Now, the only thing I need to install at this point is this Red Hat VirtIO SCSI pass-through controller, and then hit Install. This then takes us through to the next part of the Windows installer. So I'll just keep the language settings as they are, as they're correct for my region. Keyboard layout is fine. I do want to install Windows 11, and I need to check the box to say that I recognize that this is going to delete everything from my hard drive. It then asks for a product key, but either if you don't have one, or you're going to purchase one later, or you want to make sure that the install works before you buy a product key, just click the link over here that says I don't have a product key. You then select the version of Windows that you want to use. I'm just going to leave that as Home for now, but you can select Pro. You then have to accept the license terms. And here is another bit where we struggle with drivers. This is the point where you need to select the hard drive that you want to install. And right now, Windows 11 doesn't know how to see our disk. But if you go to this Load Driver option, and then come back to Browse, select our boot media, and you can see now the other CDs are showing up as well. This makes me think that this was actually a Windows problem originally. Go back to Sources, Drivers, and then hit OK. We can now select this last option of Red Hat VirtIO SCSI controller and hit Install. And now our virtual hard disk shows up. So we can just select Next. Now it says everything is ready to install, so we can just hit the Install button. And this will now go off and install Windows 11, or at least the first half of it anyway. I'll come back when all of this is finished. Okay, now we're through the initial part of the installer, and we're on to the post-install steps. So the first thing I need to do here is confirm my country and the keyboard layout. I'm then going to skip adding a second keyboard layout. And here it wants us to connect to a network. Now at this point, there are ways that you can get Windows 11 installed to run with only a local account configured. However, Microsoft seem to be plugging this gap just as fast as people find ways to do it. So I'm not going to do that here. And so I will go through using my Microsoft account to log in once I'm connected to the network. But if you do want to go through setting up a local account, you'll need to find a tutorial that works online to do it. But this is the point where you would need to apply it. For me, I'm just going to click this Install Driver button. I'm then going to use my VirtIO CD. I'm going to come down to Net KVM, going to scroll down to Win11 and ARM64, and then click Select Folder. This will then go ahead and install the VirtIO driver for the network. And now it's telling me I need to reboot to continue. And now, just to be awkward, it's asking me the same questions about the country and the keyboard layout. It will now go through checking for Windows updates, and of course there will be some ever since this ISO got produced. So this again could take a while. Now we're past the Windows updates, we're through the remaining questions that the installer asks us. Firstly, we need to give the PC a name. And of course, it has to ask us yet more about some customization questions. Let's just skip this. And skip using my phone. I don't want to use cloud backup, I only want to save files to this PC. I don't want to import any browser bookmarks or other settings. I definitely don't want Microsoft 365. I really don't want Microsoft 365. I really don't want Microsoft 365. And finally, after all of that, we have a desktop. Now there is one last thing that we do need to do before we can really use the system, and that's install the remainder of our drivers. So for that, I just need to open up File Explorer, navigate to our second CD-ROM, and then at the bottom of here, there's a Setup tool. Agree to the terms and click Install. And this will install all of the remaining drivers that aren't currently there. You will need to confirm a few of these, but it's not a very painful process. And now everything is installed. Now, rather than just rebooting the box, I actually want to shut it down at this point. And the reason why I want to shut it down is that I want to make one more change to our virtual machine settings. Now, firstly, I want to remove our second CD-ROM, as we don't need that anymore. Now, since we also don't need our Windows 11 CD, I'm just going to click on the first CD-ROM and I'm just going to delete the media associated with it. This won't actually delete the file from the file system, but it will just say that the disk drive is empty. The next thing I want to do is get rid of the display spice, and you'll see why in a second. Now, through the GUI here, it won't actually let you remove it because there's also an associated audio device. It's just a kind of bug in virt-manager. But if you click on Overview and the XML view, and then scroll all the way to the bottom, what you need to do is delete the graphics, audio, and video elements, and then click on Apply. And now I'm going to click on Add Hardware again, and Add Video. And whereas last time in this drop-down we selected RAM FB, this time I'm going to allow it to use VirtIO. Now the drivers for this are installed in Windows, it will be able to make use of it, and it's more efficient than using the frame buffer device. I then click Add Hardware again and re-add the graphics. And now we can restart our virtual machine again. Now this time you can see that the window is slightly bigger than it was before, and this is a reflection of the fact that it's using these new VirtIO drivers. You'll also see that the display output isn't active, partially during the boot. And this is because the VirtIO driver isn't loaded until Windows is in the middle of its initialization. So all of the initial boot context isn't shown. However, Windows will come up once that's all set. But here you can see that the VirtIO driver has now picked up the video output, and you can see the display now. And we can go ahead and log into the Windows 11 environment with absolutely no issue. And now that we're logged in, I've got to say that actually the experience is really not bad. If I fire up the browser here, it doesn't actually take long for the window to appear. And navigation is actually pretty snappy. Now the screen refresh doesn't look great, and a lot of that is because there is no 3D acceleration going on through the virtual graphics card. I did try switching that on, but ended up just with a corrupted display. So I think there is a bug somewhere within the VirtIO drivers for the GPU. But if I navigate to YouTube here and I start playing back a video, there is the slight downside that there's no audio. But actually the video playback really isn't terrible. And this is despite the fact that there's no hardware acceleration going on with the video output. I mean, sure, it doesn't look great. It's not like you would like to use this on a daily basis. But given that this is Windows 11 running within a virtualized environment, I think it's actually running remarkably well. Now, navigating around regular websites where video playout and things like that aren't so much of an issue, it really does work very well. All of the links are very, very snappy, and I get the web pages coming up very quickly. Now, as it stands, the Windows 11 audio VirtIO drivers aren't working, and BVM has exactly the same problem. At some point that will get fixed and we'll end up with some VirtIO drivers that do work. In the meantime, if you do want audio out of your Windows 11 VM, you can do it because you could use a USB audio adapter, plug that into your Raspberry Pi 5, and then use the pass-through functionality from virt-manager. So you could send the USB audio device through into Windows, and there it should work just fine. And so there you have it. Windows 11 virtual machine running on a Raspberry Pi 5. Now, absolutely, this was a pretty painful process. Now, all of the stuff that happened initially when we first got to the Windows 11 installer, and it was asking for those drivers, I totally understand that within Windows 11 install media, it's not going to have drivers for VirtIO installed by default. Equally, this then leads to a chicken and egg situation, where you need the VirtIO drivers in order to be able to see the virtual device that is containing the VirtIO drivers, if that makes any sense. Otherwise, it can't see the virtual CD-ROM. So I'm guessing that's why we had all the trouble. And also the fact that after this, once we did get those drivers installed, then the CD-ROM started to appear just fine in other parts of the Windows 11 installer. I'm fairly confident with that hypothesis. So I really can't hold Microsoft on the hook for that. What I can hold them on the hook for, though, is the fact that their install process for Windows 11 is horrible. The multitude of questions that it asks, and then the fact that it asks exactly the same questions again after that reboot, is absolutely ridiculous. When you compare this to something like installing Ubuntu or Alpine Linux, or even if you're a Mac owner and you're going through installing Mac OS, there isn't anywhere near the same quantity of all of these questions being asked. Yet they make this really difficult for you, especially with the privacy questions, where Microsoft are trying to convince you that you want to share all of your data with them. On other operating systems, you just don't get this level of intrusion through the install process. So whereas this Windows 11 install ended up taking, roughly speaking, an hour and 45 minutes, if you compare that to about 15 minutes to install Ubuntu on a virtual machine, it's absolutely chalk and cheese. Now, all of those grumbles aside, as I just said earlier, once you've got that Windows 11 virtual machine running, it actually works surprisingly well. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the limits are as to what I can do with it. However, that's for another day. Once again, if you like what you see on this channel, please hit that thumbs up button, subscribe if you want to see more, and hit that notification bell so you can be told when I put a new video out. Let me know in the comments how you get on with virtual machines, and especially installing Windows virtual machines on Raspberry Pis. And if you've got any other ideas for projects that you'd like to see me do in the future, put those in there as well. It really does help the channel grow, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks so much for watching till the end, and until next time, bye for now.